Ralph, I think you're muted. Adam, alcoholic.
Ralph, alcoholic.
Should we do a recap?
Of course.
Okay, welcome to anybody that's new. We are in the 48th page of the big book in the middle paragraph, but just to do a recap, it's we agnostics. There's no chapter we believers. And this for a lot of us is a challenge, to be open-minded to a power other than or greater than ourselves. One of the ways that I take people through the big book, and as with my home group, was to look at some fundamental ideas: prayers, promises, warnings, and directions. And those can be 4 colored highlighters, but there's about 7 warnings up to where we are right now. And the first one is really a recap of the description of the alcoholic. And this is coming right from the first page, where it says, if when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely, or when drinking, you have little control over the amount you take, you are probably alcoholic. And here's the warning. It says, if that be the case, you may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer. So the bottom line with the first and second half of step 1 is I can't stop once I start. And the greater idea is that I can't stay stopped on my own. The unmanageability in the second half of step 1 is not contingent on my drinking. I had always thought because I drink, therefore my life is unmanageable. But for a lot of us, it's really the unmanageability, the spiritual maladjustment that drives me to the obsession. The obsession drives me to the allergy, and the allergy kills me. The second warning, to be doomed to an alcoholic death or to live on a spiritual basis, these are not always easy alternatives to face. The third, after a while, we had to face the fact we must find a spiritual basis of life, or else. It's another warning. If a mere code of morals or a better philosophy for life were sufficient to overcome alcohol, many of us would have recovered long ago. And the last, and there's one more after that, our human resources as marshaled by the will were insufficient. They failed utterly. There's also promises all the way through this. I'm not going to go through all of those, but there's 2 promises of the bottom half of 46, and then a couple more at the start, as we needed to commence spiritual growth, to affect our first consciousness relation with God as we understood him. Afterward, we found ourselves accepting many things which seemed entirely out of reach. So all of those concepts coming into we agnostics, I had to go through with a sponsor and ask myself those questions. And where we are right now is talking about ideas that I have that I don't fully understand, with the analogy of electricity. Ralph, do you want to go from there?
Yeah. Yeah, and I just want to say something. Ralph, alcoholic. I was reading today with somebody, and it talks about hoping against hope. It says, but after a while, we had to face the fact that we must find the spiritual basis of life. And the problem that some people I feel might have is that they think, it says lack of power was our dilemma, not lack of faith, that many people have faith, and not lack of religion. And I think this is the important part where we start to get into about, setting aside some of our old ideas and old belief systems, and just to kind of look at maybe if it worked for these people, it'll work for us. Where are we at the bottom of 48?
We're in the middle, where it says the reader may still ask why he should believe in a power greater than himself.
Okay. I think there are good reasons. Let us look at them. The practical individual today is a stickler for facts and results. Nevertheless, the 20th century readily accepts theories of kinds which, provided they are firmly grounded in fact. We have numerous theories, for example, about electricity. Everybody believes without a murmur of doubt. Why this readily acceptance? Simply because it is impossible to explain what we see, feel, direct, and use without a reasonable assumption as a starting point. Everybody nowadays believes in scores of assumption for which there is good evidence, but no perfect visual proof. And does not science demonstrate that the visual proof is the weakest proof? In the beginning, constantly revealed as mankind, the studies of material world, that outward appearances are not inward reality at all. And what it's trying to do is it's trying to get us to say that in our lives right now, we believe in a lot of things that we don't understand. And for me, when I came into this program, it was the other members of the Alcoholics Anonymous that were here before me that had something that I wanted, that they were able to feel, They were able to see, feel, and direct their lives. They had to sit, they were seemed happy, and they were doing it without drinking. Adam?
Yeah, there's a saying that, and I'm going to say it again in a couple pages, that Einstein was quoted as saying, I would rather live my life pretending there's a God and finding out there isn't than live my life pretending there's no God and finding out there is. The idea of being open-minded to this idea, like I had to get results from booze before I had faith in it, right? I eventually got results from alcohol, and I came to believe, I came to trust, I came to rely on it. And this chapter for me has challenged some of my belief systems. Now, a lot of people have very different beliefs about God. Some people believe in a Santa Claus God. If they're good, they get a reward. I have a belief in LA about a parking meter God. If I get a space, it's great. If I don't, it's not. I have a variety of different conditional relationships on this power. And my experience with that coming through this part of the book and that thing about electricity is an example of how many things do I believe in that I do not understand. Again, the challenge. When you look at the laws of physics, inertia, velocity, centrifugal force, right? Euclidean geometry, all of those things that I studied in college were immutable laws of physics. There's no one that disputes those laws. And we had talked about, a color TV. Only 1 out of 1,000 people in electronic engineering can tell you how that works. Yet we believe in scores of things that we do not understand. Why is it that we talk about spiritual ideas that my mind snaps shut? I came from a place where I didn't want to pray to God. I didn't want God to find out where I was because I believed in a punishing God. And this chapter is going to continue to challenge those ideas. And for me, I got to a place where I started to look at this power in 3 ideas: direction, wisdom, and power. That's what I'm looking for through this connection. People have different ideas about that. But so they're going to talk about another way that we look at our perception. Should I continue with this next piece, Ralph?
Yeah, continue.
Okay, the prosaic steel girder, which means the ordinary steel girder, is a mass of electrons whirling around each other at incredible speed. These tiny bodies are governed by precise laws. And these laws hold true throughout the material world. So now we're talking about the immutable laws that I was just talking about. Science tells us so. We have no reason to doubt it. When, however, the perfectly logical assumption is suggested that underneath the material world and life as we see it, there is, and notice the capitals here, an all-powerful, guiding, creative intelligence. Right there, our perverse streak comes to the surface, and we laboriously set out to convince ourselves it isn't so. We read wordy books and indulge in windy arguments, thinking we believe the universe needs no God to explain it. Were our contentions true, it would follow that life originated out of nothing, means nothing, and proceeds nowhere, and suddenly you see this amazing thing called man. It doesn't make sense. And that's the question I have after this paragraph, Ralph, is that, it really proves that a lot of my perceptions are false. When I look at outward reality, how many times are my perceptions inadequate? So the first question is, do I believe in things that I do not understand? And I had to agree. And I'm working with a sponsee asking these questions. And how often are my perceptions of physical reality inadequate or untrue? Because I'm starting to question this perverse streak in me that challenges the idea of some kind of spirit in the universe, something that guides us. And the bottom line with this for me is, if there's all these physical laws, why wouldn't there be spiritual laws? And that's all I'm trying to do in this part of the book, is become open-minded. And what we're going to do after this is we're going to start to look at the results, because a lot of us can't define God. It doesn't ask me to do that in the 3rd step, but it asks me to understand a relationship to this power. It's not a definition, but a relationship. And that relationship may be, for some of us, God will steer, but God won't row. If you get in a closet and pray for a hot dog, guess what? You'll die. I have to move out of that and take some kind of proactive action. And that seems to be the relationship that we develop with this power. That if I follow some simple principles, what happens is my life starts to work better. And from that, I establish a relationship with those principles. And later, for a lot of us, it becomes the powerful hand of some kind of God. So I'll leave it at that, Ralph.
It's got to go from faith to consciousness. Like everyone in this room, if we were at a real meeting face to face, and after the meeting we were all leaving, we all had faith that on the way home that there's police and they're doing their job, and that faith would keep us maybe from speeding, and that's knowledge, okay? But all of a sudden, if you're going too fast and you see those red lights behind you speeding up, now you're having conscious contact experience with the police. And I've had I've been with plenty of people that had all kinds of faith in a God. They had faith, but they didn't have a conscious contact, a personal relationship. And for me, I was raised a Catholic. I did everything that they were supposed to do. And what I was picking up, it's definitely not what they were selling. I'm not trying to offend anyone that's Catholic, was not what I was hearing. When I came here, they said the door's very roomy. You know, believe whatever you want. So I just started to establish that conscious contact with God. And it was because I saw God or a higher power working in other people. So, and it talks about, we who have traveled this dubious path, begging you to lay aside this prejudice. And to me, they're talking about who have lived this other way of life. And we're not even asking you to forget about that, forget about your religious upbringing. We're just saying just to lay it aside. We trick you later on in chapter 5. We tell you that old ideas avail us nothing. But right now, we're not saying that. We're just saying to lay aside what you know, even against organized religions. We have learned that whatever human frailties of these faiths may be, those faiths have given purpose and direction to millions. People of faith have logic of idea of what life is all about. Actually, we used to have no reasonable conception whatever. We used to amuse ourselves by cynically dissecting spiritual beliefs and practices when we might have observed that many spiritual-minded persons of all races, colors, creeds, demonstrating their degree of stability, happiness, and usefulness, which we could have sought to ourselves. And one example I can think of is, as a kid growing up, I don't really see it so much anymore, you hear a knock on your door, and it's these Jehovah's Witnesses. They're at their door. They have faith in what they're talking about, and they're trying to do it, and they're happy people, but they're trying to do their deal, and they have purpose. That is their purpose. Other religions, they have their purpose where they go and they go become a missionary for 2 years or 3 years, but they have purpose in their life. So it's asking us to look at some of these other things. Demonstrating stability, happiness, and usefulness we could have sought ourselves. And the question is, do you have any degree of stability, happiness, or usefulness? And we just talked about, we're going to be talking about that on page 52, the unmanageability is that most of us are unstable, unhappy, and feeling very much unuseful, you know. Instead, we look at the human defects of these people. Did you do that? That's a question mark. Sometimes we view their shortcomings as a basis wholesale condemnation. You know, maybe the preacher on TV that got caught with the boy or the girl or whatever. We talked of intolerance while we were talking intolerant ourselves. We missed the reality of the beauty of the forest because we were diverted by the ugliest of some of its trees. We never gave the spiritual side of life a fair hearing. Question mark. Did you ever try to give the spiritual life a fair hearing? And what we're talking about here is the spiritual, not religious. Adam?
You know, that paragraph you just read is very much like principles before personalities. Can I see the fundamental principles behind theology? And in comparative theology, when I go through this part of the book, I will suggest to the person I'm working with the common denominators of world religions: common good, belief in an afterlife. Usually they incorporate prayer and meditation. All of them have fundamental ideas or principles which stand before the personalities that destroy them. And what we do, like a lot of us, is we get caught up in the personalities, the human frailties of these organizations, when in reality, they do have an organized approach to life. A lot of them have a life based on principle, on ethics, on fundamental values, on family. And when I start to look at the good and I stop looking at the ugliness of some of the trees, I start to see, in many ways, like the book's going to say later, where we see that some of these principles really are good, that we can see a lot of these fundamental ideas underneath this organization that really are good. And they do things like charity. They do things like, helpfulness and kindness and support. And I start to see that. So it became really important for me to say, and I want to say one last thing. I really hate to say this, but I can remember being on a gurney and having the paramedics over me with those paddles. And I was still conscious. And all I know is God. If you've ever been confronted with your mortality in a situation where it's life or death, there's only two things human beings cry for. And a lot of this comes out of the military: mommy and God. Those are the two things that men or women cry for before their death. When I have my head in that toilet every morning, puking my guts out with the dry heaves as an alcoholic, all I did was ask God for help. And what's so fascinating is I get a couple of days away from that last drink, and now you got to write this chapter called We Agnostics to go through all of these fundamental ideas to challenge my intellect that there just might be a power in this universe other than me. I mean, I look at one of these global satellites now that can run 10 million GPS devices in cars. One satellite can tell where every car is. They can tell what speed it's doing. They can relay all that data back up to that satellite. And I don't think there could be a power in this universe that could have any influence over me whatsoever. I was born with the gift of faith, and that's something that I believe is a gift. Not everybody has it. But I still have to come up with some kind of alignment here to see what makes sense. And a lot of this chapter is going to talk about what that is. What is it that comes up in me between that moment when all I know is God and all of a sudden this need to prove that it doesn't exist? They say God cannot use a man till he comes to the end of himself. It's a great line. The longest trip from an alcoholic is from their head to their heart. The shortest trip is from our knees to the ground. If we cannot give you that gift of desperation, but it wasn't that hard for me. Once I got to this place and I started to just be open-minded to these ideas, what we're going to talk about next is we're going to talk about the results. We're going to talk about we can't see the wind, but we can see the evidence. You look at people that came to AA the day before they died, and now you see people that have good lives, that are chasing their dreams. I mean, people that were broken like us, having the kind of lives that we have, it's like there is definitely a miracle going on here. Because all the therapists in the world couldn't help me, but you guys did. Ralph?
Yeah, one more thing to touch on that, Adam. We were talked before on the transitory types of spiritual experiences that people had, and sometimes people can get off track here in step 2 when we find out what the answer is. What's the answer is finding that power. And sometimes instead of AA, I have seen in my experience people go to certain religions or certain things, and instead of AA, they think they've had that contact. But Harry Tebow wrote about that, and William James talked about the transitory types where they usually fade. And what we're doing here is just a beginning. We're saying what the answer is, which the answer is a power greater than yourselves. Okay, we're not trying to be slick. We're just going to say God from this point on to make it easier, but it's a God of your understanding. But what we're going to do next is get connected to that power. So just stopping here, what some people do, they all of a sudden they start to change. I'm praying, I'm doing this and that, but they're not really have that experience with God. They maybe start to have faith in God, but not the experience, the conscious contact, which is a big difference. Adam, could you talk about that for a second? Because me and you had a deep conversation with that about a week ago.
Well, it's very broad. They had asked Michelangelo how he made the statue of David, and he said, I never made the statue of David. I chipped away everything that wasn't David. And that fundamental idea isn't just me developing self-acceptance and the traditions, me being blocked from community, but it has to do with these old ideas that I have here. And what you were talking about, there is a huge stumbling block with a lot of people in AA. And I love a lot of the religious bodies, but what I've seen with a lot of people that we've lost in recovery is I would never substitute religion for Alcoholics Anonymous. I would do it in addition to Alcoholics Anonymous. And when I start to see that even AA, I have friends that are Buddhists, I have friends that are Islamic, I have friends that are Christian, I have a lot of Jewish friends. And, we even argue about the Lord's Prayer, but the Lord's Prayer was never, it's not a Christian prayer, it's actually a Jewish prayer. And I heard 2 rabbis talking about, it was created by a rabbi, and they showed these Jewish guys the Lord's Prayer out of the Torah, and they're like, oh my gosh. It was like there's so many fundamental ideas based in these spiritual principles that once I start to understand, and I'm not going to get into that prayer right now, but you can take that apart and see all the 12 steps built into these ideas, and they're just principles. Like my daily life. Bill had read a book called Living Our Lives 24 Hours a Day, to stay in the moment, to be free from the past or the future. All these things help me to, when it says find God now, I'm going to develop some kind of connection to this power by being rid of the things in me that are blocking me. I come to God by default. This is the hardest chapter in the book to talk about. If you're new, I would cringe when I started working with newcomers in this chapter for many, many years. And now I've come to see that it is just the beginning of them developing some kind of trust, sometimes just in AA, that when they see people take anniversaries, you will see from that, they will develop what they're going to say very shortly, just enough open-mindedness in this chapter to develop a relationship with something that can keep you not only sober, but bring you joy in your life. Hope I didn't ruin that question too much. But
you want to continue, Adam?
In our personal stories, you will find a wide variation in the way each teller approaches and conceives of a power greater than himself or other than himself, okay? Whether we agree with a particular approach or conception seems to make little difference. Okay, very open-minded here. Experience has taught us these are matters about which, for the purpose, we need not be worried, okay? There are questions for each individual to settle for himself. One proposition, however, these men and women are strikingly agreed. Every one of them has gained access to, these are conditions, gained access to, believes in a power greater than himself. This power has, in each case, accomplished the miraculous and humanly impossible. A celebrated American statement put it this way. Let's look at the record. And Ralph, I want you to continue, but this is where we start to look at the record. And I'll tell you right now, if you're new, when the therapeutic community tells people like us that we have no evidence-based results, I challenge them to go look at a world convention and check out 80,000 of us coming from all over this magnificent planet to celebrate recovery. And we're not talking about people that are using their insurance. There are people that have bought an airline ticket, got a conference ticket, got a rent-a-car, bought a hotel, right? And have come from all over the world to celebrate recovery. 80,000 people. Every one of those people have a mom, a dad, brother, sister, and countless people in their lives that have benefited from this movement. And when you look at all that, how can we ever say there are not evidence-based results? So, Ralph, when you say, let's look at the record, it is indisputable. Alcoholics Anonymous takes people like us that come to AA the day before we die, the laughingstock of a lot of our families. This was the most shameful thing in the world, to be the family drunk. And to be 22 years away from that and be the strongest link, you don't think that's results? Continue.
These are all promises, and these are all goosebumps when you've read this book hundreds of times. Here are thousands of men and women, worldly indeed. They flatly declared that since they had come to believe in a power greater than themselves, to take a certain attitude. That attitude is discussed on page 55, the last paragraph. If you go there with me quick, it says, if you wish, you can join us on the broad highway. With this attitude, you cannot fail. The consciousness of your belief is surely to come to you. Okay. And thinking in the face of collapse and despair, in the face of total failure of their human resources, they found a new power, peace, and happiness in such directions flow into them. This happened as soon as they wholeheartedly met a few simple requirements. Once confused and baffled by seemingly futile existence, they showed an underlying reason why they were making heavy going of life. And the heavy going of life is while we were drinking before, and it could be if you're sober for a while and not practicing these principles. And the few simple requirements up until this point is A, Ralph is an alcoholic and could not manage his own life. That B, probably no human power could relieve my alcoholism. And C, I'm starting to believe that God couldn't if he was sought. Leaving aside the drink question, they felt that living was so unsatisfactory, Question mark. When you're not drinking, is life unsatisfactory? These are all considerations. They show how the change came over them. We see that when we tell the story. When hundreds of people are able to say that the consciousness of the presence of God, and with a capital P and G, today is the most important fact in their lives, they present a powerful reason why one should have faith. And we're still talking about faith, but the faith soon is going to be transported to conscious contact. The world has made many Adam, you want to go over that again? Or keep going? You're muted, bro.
This is the proof. When I look at that paragraph again, and I look at the results, I see the evidence. I see the evidence when people take cakes. I see the evidence when newcomers take chips, 30, 60, 90 days. I see it when people have relationships that work. I see it in the love and the kindness that you see in the rooms. It is indisputable. I'll leave it at that and continue. What I was trying to do is look who the celebrated American statesman is. Do you remember? I think he was a senator.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah, okay.
The world has made more material progress in the last century than all the millennials which went before. And you could just say that since some of us have been alive. Just think about the things that have happened with the cell phones, with the computers, with everything. FaceTime on a computer. Remember back in the day it was Jetsons. The Jetsons had that. Now all that stuff is coming to reality. Driveless cars. You just think about this stuff. How it talks about the longshoreman who says, "Oh yeah, they'll probably land a man on the moon." All that stuff happened. Think about this. I was looking before, just thinking that Bob from Detroit, Adam, and Susan from Connecticut are the only people. Oh, and David, and there's like 4 or 5 years that I know before COVID. All you people are friends of mine because of the virus, because of Zoom, which is cool. And a lot of yous I talk to a lot. The world has made more material progress. Almost everyone knows the reason students of ancient history tell us that the intellect of these men today was equal to the best of these days was equal to the best of them today. Yet in ancient times, material progress was painfully slow. The spirit of modern scientific inquiry, research, and invention was almost unknown. In the realm of the material, men's minds were fettered by superstition, tradition, and all sorts of fixed ideas. Some contemporaries of Columbus thought a round earth preposterous. Others came near to putting Galileo to death for astronomer heresy. They were going to kill him because he's the one who came up with the idea that the world wasn't flat, that the world was round. And as for Columbus, he was an alcoholic. Why is he an alcoholic? Well, he didn't know where he was. He didn't know where he was going. He lied when he got there, and a woman financed the whole trip. Adam, come on, help me out here, buddy.
Oh, my joke, Ralph.
Okay.
Going through this with a new person, the leading question here is going to be old ideas. It's the old ideas that are holding me from being open-minded to a spiritual experience. Obviously, everyone knows we went from the horse to the moon in 100 years. And the question, if you look at Aristotle, you look at Socrates, you look at the philosophers, it's indisputable that they had the ability for complex thought 1,000 years ago. But just like 6 blind men that feel an elephant and try to describe what it is, and one thinks it's a tree, and one thinks it's a snake, and one thinks it's a wall, until they work out their differences, they can never really comprehend the big picture. And when you start to look at the Dark Ages, and you look at the book burning, and you look at all the things that prevented us from what we call now a spiritual evolution, that's why we have the traditions in Alcoholics Anonymous, so we can see the big picture. Because until those 6 blind men can work out whether they're left or right, black or white, gay or straight, all the old ideas that blocked us from progress that we're talking about. And the other things, that Galileo was held up for heresy, and we're going to talk about Kitty Hawk. They wouldn't publish it in the newspapers because they didn't see it themselves. That's the way our mind is constructed. that unless we have visual proof, and I've told my sponsees at this point, when I usually have like 10 guys in my living room, and I tell them, if God came down in the middle of this room and told everybody that we were going to live forever in all his glory and majesty, I would still wake up tomorrow hungry and having difficulty with traffic. I'd still have problems with my boss. Faith is not enough. Alcoholics Anonymous is going to demand more than just believing here. Ralph, shall I continue?
Go ahead. We asked.
Okay, so we asked ourselves this: are not some of us just as biased and unreasonable out the realm of the spirit, okay, the realm of the spirit, as the ancients were about the realm of the material, okay? Even in this present century, American newspapers, and that was the last century now, by the way, were afraid to print the account of the Wright brothers' first successful flight at Kitty Hawk. Why? Had not all the efforts at flight failed before? Did not Professor Langley's flying machine go to the bottom of the Potomac River? Was it not true that the best mathematical minds had proved man could never fly? Had not people said God had reserved the right of flight to the birds? Only 30 years later, the conquest of air was almost an old story, and airplane travel was in full swing. So what is it that's holding us back? My fixed ideas, my superstition, and I challenge people, again, always go to the results. Look at the results of recovery. Look at the aggregate results, as Dr. Silkworth said, of the recovery process. And even in the therapeutic community, I will challenge them in this way, that they say, the ones that actually have done the research, and now that the New York Times article, it said that Alcoholics Anonymous, the 12-step program, works the best for the most. And if you're new and you're struggling, isn't that just enough to make a start at this point? Because again, why is it? These are all the ways that I fight against this power.
Okay. Well, guys, I'm not sure who's sharing tonight. Is Jess here or Ronnie? You want to do
seventh tradition?
Quick? Ronnie?
I think this group wants to pass the cyber basket.
Yeah, we have each group has their
Hey, everybody. My name is Rodney. I'm alcoholic. We like to pass the virtual basket if we can. And you can contribute to our meeting to help us support AA services here in Vancouver and AA World Services in New York by contributing to the PayPal account or the e-transfer for Canadians provided in the chat. Thanks, guys.
Okay. All right. All right. So there's a story that there's a speaker from California that he just passed, and he had probably 60 years of sobriety. His name was Clancy. And I heard him tell the story a long time ago. And he's talking about a man who's in the middle of the water, in the middle of the ocean, and he's drowning, and he's in a sea of alcoholism, and he's stranded. And he knows he's going to die because he can only tread for so long. And all of a sudden, he's starting to thinks he's getting delirious, and he sees these guys rowing. And he's like, what the hell is that? But there's no boat. And they get closer and closer and closer, and he's still treading and treading, and these guys pull up, and they're from Alcoholics Anonymous. And there's two of them. They say, hey, you want to get in a boat? And he goes, well, what are you talking about? There's no boat there. And he goes, yeah, we have 12 steps. We have a way to live. We have a way to get you out of here. And there's home group and bad coffee and all this other stuff. It's like, no, get out of here. He goes, you guys are nuts. And the guy goes. And like a little while later, all of a sudden on the horizon, he sees this big boat. And it's a rehab. And on that boat, they have doctors, they have nurses, they have acupuncture, massage therapy, pools, all kinds of stuff to do. And whatever. And as he gets closer, he goes, yo, you want to come here? He goes, yeah. He goes, just give us your insurance card and come aboard. And he comes aboard the boat, and he's on board this boat, and he gets analyzed, and he gets talked to, and he gets all this crazy stuff. And after 30 days, he's like, oh, forget this. And he jumps back into the water. And now he's back in the water thinking he's going to die. And all of a sudden, here comes these two guys again, rowing this imaginary boat, and has to get closer. He's desperate now because he knows he's at the end. So the guys help him into the boat, and they goes, what do I do? And they go, pick up the oar and start to row. He goes, what do you mean? He goes, yeah, make coffee. He goes, what do you mean? Greet those guys at the door. He goes, what do you mean? Help us put away the chairs. How is that going to help me live? And he's rowing. He goes, how is this going to help me be heaven? He goes, just do it. It is. And on that boat, the man was able to build a very successful life. He was able to be happy. He was able to raise kids. He was able to be an active member in his home group and everything just by rowing the boat. But some people come in AA, they row the boat for a while, and then they just stop rowing. And when they stop rowing, they start to die and end up back in the sea of alcoholism. Adam?
Yeah, that by the way, by Clancy Imislund, you can Google Clancy I Invisible Boat, and he'll tell you that story. Has anyone heard the story of the Eskimo? The story like when they say someone was my Eskimo, that comes from the story of a priest and an atheist, and they're in a bar in Alaska, and the priest says to the atheist, "Why don't you believe in God?" And the atheist says, "Oh, I tried God once." And the priest says, "Well, what do you mean?" And he says, well, I was in a blizzard. I was lost in the snow. It was dark, and I knew I was going to die. And I got on my knees and I said, "God, if there's a God, help me." And the priest looks at him. He says, "Well, you must believe. You're here." And he says, "No, you don't understand. Right after I got off my knees, this Eskimo showed me the way back into town." And that, I tell people, welcome to the igloo, but that is one of the ways that this begins for some of us. We bump into people in Alcoholics Anonymous that have had a spiritual experience. Like my sponsor has said to me, he said, "How free do you want to be?" And that was enough, because I knew him and I knew what he was, but he wasn't that way anymore. And that was the beginning. Another one that there, and there's probably like 20 stories that I could tell that surround we agnostics. But the other one is, I think it was Burt Lancaster, one of these famous actors in Hollywood in the 50s. He was a total atheist, and one of those card-carrying atheists, and he couldn't get a job anywhere in Hollywood. There was one job available, and it was playing a priest. So, he doesn't want to do it, but he has to do it. He needs money. So he has to get a frock, and he has to go into this big church. He has to study when you do these big parts, you have to study everything about running a mass. He had to learn, all these prayers. And about 6 months into studying for this part, he started to believe. He came to believe. And my experience, if you're new, if you're faced with alcoholic destruction, if you're in a position now where this is an all or nothing proposition, like the book says, just follow our lead with this. You don't have to believe right now. And I would never stop somebody that doesn't believe from continuing through this process, especially steps 4 through 9, even if you're just marginally open-minded to a spiritual experience and not an anthropomorphic God. Just believe in a power other than yourself. And that's going to be a big condition here, is that we have to stop playing God. It is that in and of itself that starts to help me to become open-minded to a life based on principle. So
51. We asked ourselves this: are not some of us just as biased and unreasonable about the realm of the spirit as the ancients were about the realms of material? Even this peasant country, Americans, newspapers were afraid to print the accounting of the Wright brothers for a successful flight at Kitty Hawk. Had not all efforts at flight failed before? Did not Professor Langley's flying machine go to the bottom of the Potomac River? Was it not true that the best mathematical minds could prove man cannot fly? Had not people said God has reserved the privilege to birds? Only 30 years later, that concept of air was almost as old story as airplane travel in full swing. But in most fields of generation has witnessed complete liberation of our thinking. Show any longshoreman the Sunday supplement describing a proposed explore the moon by which the means to a rocket will say, "I bet they do that someday." Or maybe not so long either. It is not our age character, but the case which we are discard old ideas for new. But the complete readiness for which we throw away the theory or gadget which does not work for something new which does. And the problem for most people, and I know I'll speak for myself, is that I had a game plan for a living, and it was my plan. And I want, when people told me I had to get rid of my plan, that was my game plan for a living. Those were my ideas. Those were my belief systems that were ingrained in me as a kid and through my experiences. So that is my go-to. And for me to try and let go of this and grab something different was very painful. But thank God for alcohol, because that made it possible. And thank God for the people who were there before me that I saw. I was like, wow, this person drank like I drank, I could tell, acted like I drank, and more importantly, felt like I felt. See, because drinking obviously was the problem, but for me, when I stopped drinking, when I was sober 30 or 60 days or 90 days, why do I feel worse? I haven't had a drink in 60 days. I haven't been drunk in this time, but I start to feel worse when I'm sober. So I didn't know this. I didn't know that lack of power. That was my dilemma, that I didn't have that I was suffering this spiritual malady that I was blocked off from. So when I came in here, I had to start to get rid of these old ideas that a real man don't cry, or real men don't ask for help. I'm just going to buckle up and just not drink no matter what. Even the ideas that I heard of when I first came into the room, many of those were old ideas because they were not in our program. A lot of stuff that you hear in meetings are what we call middle of the road solutions. Don't pick up no matter what. Think the drink through. Old idea. Just have two. Okay. 2 dozen, So Adam?
Well, I mean, Bill uses 2 ideas here. He's using the Dark Ages versus the Industrial Revolution. And this is he's going to talk about a revolution in our thinking, a liberation of the way that we look at life. This next paragraph is in many ways the litmus test for the second half of step 1. It said we had to ask ourselves why we shouldn't apply to our human problems the same readiness to change our point of view, which is like attitude. This is attitude and the idea to set aside my old ideas. We were having trouble with personal relations. Now, I asked my sponsees, when they're not drinking, are they still having trouble with personal relations? The yes or no question. When they're not drinking, are they still having trouble controlling their emotional nature? When they're not drinking, are they still a prey to misery and depression? When they're not drinking, can they make a living adequate to feel satisfied? When they're not drinking, do they still have a feeling of uselessness? When they're not drinking, are they still full of fear? When they're not drinking, are they basically unhappy? Okay? We couldn't seem to be of real help to other people. Was not a basic solution to these bedevilments more important? Because this is my natural state without a drink, okay? Then whether we should see newsreels of lunar flight, of course it was. So when I go through this part of the book with a sponsee, I might even jump right there when they think that all they have to do is stop drinking. I will ask them those questions. Again, I'm going to reiterate them. When I'm not drinking, am I still a prey to misery and depression? Yes or no? When I'm not drinking, am I still having trouble controlling my emotional nature? When I'm not drinking, am I still having trouble with personal relationships? When I'm not drinking, am I still full of fear? And that seems to be, in many ways, the litmus test of the second half of step 1. Because if I've never, in all these years, seen somebody that didn't have any problems in this area ever really do the rest of the steps. You know why? Because they probably didn't need to. But if you're like me, when I stop drinking, the outsides get better, but the insides get worse. And this seems to be the earmark of unmanageability. Do you use this, Ralph, as a test?
Yeah, and I match it up on page 8 with the other promises. There's 8 bedevilments here, and you can match those up 30 pages later with the promises. And that's what happens from taking action. There is no into thinking chapter, it's into action, And that's what I was saying about. I get removed from a drink, I feel worse, not better, And it says, and this is what I was talking about, when I saw others solve their problem by a simple reliance upon a spirit of the universe. That could just be the group of drunks. That could be whatever their higher power that they're talking about. But I was willing to believe. I didn't believe at that point, but I was willing to believe. The universe, we had to stop doubting the power of God. Willpower did not work, but the God idea did. That's what I had always put in there, willpower. My power didn't work, but the God idea did. The Wright brothers' almost childish faith that they had come to build a machine which could fly was the mainspring of their accomplishment. Without that, nothing could have happened. And that's the for our recovery, believing that it could happen. It says childish faith, and that's what I started out with, was childish faith that I could recover if it worked for you guys. Without that, nothing could happen. We agnostics, that means we without knowledge or a relationship with the God, or we atheists who don't, you can't argue with atheists because there is no God in their mind. We're sticking to the idea that self-sufficiency would solve our problems. Again, I was raised Catholic. but I thought that, a real man could beat this. I should be able to stop. I should be able to just be a normal guy, when others showed us that God's sufficiency worked with them, we began to feel like those who had insisted that the Wright brothers can never fly. Adam?
It's such a powerful thing. That last statement right after the bedevilments is the results. We saw others solve their problems. I saw people with long-term recovery that had relationships that worked, that were able to navigate around the drama, that were able to match calamity with serenity. I stopped doubting the power because I saw it in other people. Again, the results. I had to get out of the debate on this. Again, it's going back to the same thing, faced with alcoholic destruction or to live on a spiritual basis. And, for Al-Anons, it might not be alcoholic destruction. It might be the destruction of self-will. That my self-will drives me into a place where my life is so unbearable, where I can't manage my personal relationships, where I'm a prey to misery and depression, where I can't control my emotions, and I am brought to my knees. I'm coming to God out of default. That's why it's going to challenge you now with an all or nothing statement. And it's very, very interesting. So I have to look at these results here. I have to see how it's my obstinacy and my stubbornness. But again, if I look at the results, if I look at people that have joy and have order and have principle, it is indisputable. And again, that thing about I'm only going to get there through spiritual bankruptcy. Why would I do it when I got a brand new convertible, little boat in the marina, nice house, trophies? It usually doesn't happen until I'm brought to a place of spiritual bankruptcy that I become open-minded. And I'll leave you with this at this point. Part of the word spiritual is ritual. And a lot of the things that we do in AA, like go to meetings, work steps, and help others, it's a very simple roadmap to spiritual success. That if I take these actions, what happens is I start to develop, like that guy, that the atheist that had to play the priest. Suddenly what happens is I start to trust that I'm going to be okay. You know that feeling between 2 and 3 drinks where you just know everything's going to be okay? That's something that we get through this process. And that's the hook. When you see people on fire about AA, you know why they're on fire? Because they got results from it. Faced with alcoholic destruction, and now they're living on a spiritual basis, and it feels good to do the right thing, and all of a sudden they have a host of friends, and all of a sudden they can apply these principles and these tools to their life. It's at that point, you ain't going back. Because if you take booze away from someone like me and you don't give me something better, I will never stay here. That's why I was in and out for all those years until someone took me through this process and just broke me open enough to move through the rest of the steps. This is going to be a huge transition for some people. If you can just get through this part and then do 4 through 9 with us, I promise you'll get results.
And I mean, you can tell how passionate both of us are about this part of the book, because it's a transition to push through the resistance, at least to open your mind to this stuff. But the book in general has a lot of good information in it, but it's the information followed up by application that's going to lead to the transformation. Like my sponsor Sandy used to always say, he said, the greatest thing about this stuff that we talk about and the spirituality stuff is you don't have to understand it to try it. So just try it and evaluate the results. And if you're like the rest of us, hopefully you're going to be amazed before you're halfway through. Ron, do we have some time for some questions?
Yeah, we're at the top of 53 for next week. We couldn't do this in 2 sessions. There's just too much here.
Yeah, if anybody has any questions, you can raise your hand and we can then go through. So Michelle?
I didn't see you there, Matthew.
You want to unmute?
Hi, I'm Michelle and I'm an alcoholic. Wow. Thanks. Another awesome night. My question, and I know you could probably go on and on all night about it, but in general, people who say, oh, I don't need to read this chapter. I believe. Right. Give it to me.
I think that, again, belief without action is not enough. And I believe, again, I've said that with all my sponsees, and Ralph, you can answer this, that if because I had the gift of faith. It was not enough to keep me sober. You got to realize in the chapter, we agnostics, you got the believer, the disbeliever, and the I don't know, and they're all drunk. You know what I mean? There's lots of priests and rabbis that are in rehab. I meet them all the time. They totally. Let me ask you this question. If there's a devil, if that exists, don't you think the devil believes in God?
Yeah.
And that, so based on that question, all I'm going to do here is I'm going to come to start to believe in a process first. And that process opens a door. It opens a door. And, I was having this discussion with my girlfriend about, there's a thing I stand at. You ever heard someone say they're God's a doorknob? You ever heard that? And we all roll our eyes. But if you read, I suggest you do a couple things. One is to look at the bedevilments versus the promises. You can Google that. But Google I stand at the door. It's a poem by Sam Shoemaker, and he says, I stand at this door. It's a door that people are looking for all over the world. I don't go too far in the door because I am consumed with the magnificence that's in this door. So I stand by the door. It's a door that people look for all over the world blindly. I don't go too far outside the door because if I do, I lose touch with what's in the door and I get caught up in worldly clamors. So I stand at the door and I put these people's hands on the latch because it's only their hand that can open the door. And then Shoemaker reveals that it's the door to God. It is a magnificent, magnificent prayer. It's a poem, but if you look at the detail in it, you'll start to see theology and religion and atheism and agnosticism and evangelism. All of that is built into it. And then you hear someone say, my God is a doorknob, and it's really deep because AA is a door and a portal to a power that will solve your problem.
And also, Michelle, there was a nun in the first edition who was married to Jesus. She would wear a ring and she coached kids basketball, and she had all kinds of knowledge of Jesus and the Catholic Church or whatever. And at night she could not drink, So again, it says lack of power, not lack of faith. We have to get through that. And that's what this is, the invitation. Step 2 is the invitation. And then when we say, okay, we take the invitation, we do the rest of the work in 3 through 9 to get connected. Because how many times, I don't know how long some of you's been sober, maybe, you hear someone saying, they're praying. And it's not that they're praying, it's that they're blocked. And usually we're blocked by self, or blocked by anger, or blocked by these other things from that connection. So if someone that just has faith and they believe, that's great. But we still got that person unblocked, because if they did believe, they probably wouldn't be drinking because they would be connected to a higher power, which wants us happy, joyous, and free. So I hope that helps.
Great, thanks, Michelle. Anyone else have any questions quickly while we're?
Yeah, this chapter shut everybody down. I can see it. There was 20 questions before we got to this one. I know. That's why, you see how that is? It's very interesting.
Yeah. Well,
everyone's like, I don't know where to go with this one.
We'll invite everyone to come back and join next week if they have any further questions as we continue to dive into We Agnostics. But first, I want to thank everybody here for being with us tonight.